Brittany, and if you're already subscribed to my channel, welcome back to Makeup and Murder. If you're just finding my channel for the very first time, before we go any further, make sure you go ahead and subscribe to my channel, and then make sure you also hit that notification bell so that you get notified whenever I post new content. And you might as well just like the video while you're down there in that little area. Might as well do it. I guarantee within about 3 minutes, you're gonna like it anyway. So just trust me, just do it, just trust me. Today we are jumping right into the murder of Maria Marta Garcia belsunce. Now, Maria Marta, I'm just gonna call her Maria because her name is so damn long. Now, Maria was born into a very interesting family. Her mother and father were married, they had kids already, and during her childhood, they shared a pediatrician. The family was very wealthy, they were pretty well off, and they had a specific doctor, a specific pediatrician that they used and they trusted. What ends up happening is Maria's mother decides that she wants to have a full-on affair with the pediatrician. Now, this happens, she decides she's gonna leave her husband for the pediatrician, and she remarries the pediatrician after she leaves her husband. So Maria has siblings and half-siblings just all over the place. So they have a pretty big family. Her family, again, like I said, they are very well off. I always feel like rich people have these quirks and things and what have you, and the way that they behave. And we will see that clear as day in this story. This story it's bonkers, y'all, it's bonkers. Maria met her husband, Carlos, and they knew each other for a while, I think, since they were small. So they got married. She was much younger than he was. She was 19 when they got married, and they were married for 30 years before she was murdered. That is a long time to be married. Most of the time when people get married so young, you tend to see things not working out just because you are so young and you don't really know yourself that well at that age. But they were perfect for each other. They complemented each other well. They were complete opposites. She was very serious. He was a goofball. So they really complemented each other very well. She was very into sports and fitness, and he was not. The relationship was perfect. They fit and complement each other very well. Maria was very, very smart. Maria was a very fiery person, is the way that they explained her. She was very passionate. She was very explosive. When something set her off, it set her off, and she didn't have a problem at all saying anything about it. Which again was like the complete opposite of her husband. So they said that they really never argued, just because he kind of just let her do her thing, and happy wife, happy life. And Maria was also really, really big into philanthropy. And for those who don't know what philanthropy is, it's pretty much charity work. So she was really, really big into philanthropy, and she worked for specifically the Missing Children of Argentina organization. And her husband felt that it was a very dangerous thing to do, because it was not like, here in America where you can, post information in a paper about a missing child, or post them on a billboard, or post them on a milk carton like you can in the US. Over there, it was much more of like being in certain places, protesting, holding up, the photos of the child in the streets, and like face-to-face confrontation with these issues. So her husband specifically said that was no job for a woman, which he could have saved that comment. He could have just said it wasn't a safe job. It wasn't something that was safe, and he didn't think his wife was safe doing the work, but she was very passionate about the work, which I completely get, but that's really what drove her. We also know that Maria is not able to have kids, and she did want to have children, but finding that out was pretty devastating to her. At one point, she wanted to adopt, but her husband didn't. And then when her husband finally came around and wanted to adopt, she wasn't ready. So they didn't have any children. Her and Carlos did not have any children. Maria was very close with her siblings, and there's a number of siblings that play a key role in her murder and the events that follow after. We'll hear about her brother Horatio. We'll hear about her brother Juan or John. We'll hear about her sister Irene, and her sister's husband Guillermo Bartoli, along with some other people. But I just wanted to name those people up front because they are very key to her story and her unfortunate murder. So the murder took place on October 27th, 2002. And so apparently Maria had a routine. So she was supposed to go and play tennis with her girlfriends in the country club. Now, where they lived was a very private country club named Carmel Country Club. And it was extremely private. It had its own security guards, and everybody knew everyone, and everyone there said, you know, the neighbors were like family to them. And like this place was so private that, you know, cops couldn't get in unless they had a warrant, or they were granted permission by one of the residents. It was a beautiful place. It was a private place. Everyone, you know, treated each other like family. So that day, Maria was supposed to be playing tennis with girlfriends, and meanwhile, her husband was at her sister and brother-in-law's house, who also lived in Carmel Country Club as well. And they actually lived right across from the tennis courts. So Maria was gonna play tennis with her girls while her husband stayed with her sister and brother-in-law to watch the soccer game that day. And there was 2 soccer games on that day, and this is very important later in the story. It ended up raining, and Maria couldn't play tennis. She had to kind of call it early because it was raining, and the tennis courts were outdoors. So she decided that she was just gonna go back to her sister's house where her family was gathering. And she stayed there for a while. And after the first game was done, the first soccer game was done, she said, okay, I'm just gonna ride my bike and go home, which she had ridden her bike to go play tennis. So she was just gonna ride her bike to go home, which was a couple blocks away. They lived in the same country club. And she was supposed to have her masseuse, who came every Sunday at 7 p.m. She was supposed to have her masseuse meet her that day as well at 7 p.m. So her plan was to go home, you know, take a quick bath and get ready for the masseuse. Now, according to her husband, he stayed at her sister and brother-in-law's house to watch the game after she left. And then he stayed, there was a second game that came on, and he stayed for a very small portion of that game. And he left. He said he left and he went home. Now, as he went home, he saw a security guard on a golf cart. And the security guard in the golf cart was in their driveway. And he stopped and told Carlos, pretty much they were trying to check and see if anybody was home. The masseuse was at the gate. So this was at around 7. The masseuse was at the gate. So they were trying to get, you know, permission to allow the masseuse to enter. And no one was answering when they called to get permission to let the masseuse through. So they sent a security guard to check and make sure that everything was okay. And the security guard said he went to the door, he knocked on the door. No one answered when he went and knocked on the door. And as he was leaving, he saw Carlos Carrascosa pulling up. Now, the security guard's name is Ortiz, and that is who was there when Carlos arrived in his driveway. So Carlos said that he told Ortiz to tell the gate to let the masseuse through, and Ortiz was trying to get out of the driveway. He remembers backing up to allow Ortiz to get his golf cart out of their driveway, and then he, being Carlos, pulled into the home. So when Carlos pulls up to their driveway, he sees Maria's van in the driveway, which makes sense. She's home, she rode her bike. And he says he goes in and he's looking for Maria. He walks into their bathroom and he finds a pool of blood between the toilet and the bidet in their bathroom. And he looks in the bathtub and he sees Maria face down in the bathtub, and the bathtub itself is full of bloody water. Now, when he sees this, he hurries and he pulls her out of that bathtub full of water, and he like drags her and lays her across the threshold of the bathroom, if that makes sense. So half of her body was into the bedroom and half of her body was in the master bath. So he hurried and he called out to the masseuse and said that there's been an accident, Maria had an accident. So the masseuse runs into the house and she immediately tries to resuscitate Maria. She is trying to give her mouth to mouth, cardiac massages, anything that she can do to try to save Maria. So as she is doing that, Carlos calls Maria's sister. Now, Maria's sister and her husband, they rush over, and right after he talks to her sister says, call the doctor. He calls an ambulance, and I guess in Argentina, there is a doctor on each ambulance, which is actually good. I wish we could do that in the US. So Carlos calls for an ambulance/doctor, and the sister, in the meantime, she runs and she goes to find one of the neighbors who's actually a medical student. And she runs and brings him to see if he can do anything he can to actually save her sister as well. So then he begins the CPR process, so on and so forth. Now, when Carlos is talking to the emergency services, they ask him, is she alive? Is she breathing? You know, what's happening there? What's going on? What's the situation? So at first it sounds like he didn't want to check or touch her. He didn't want to move her, anything like that. I forgot my eyebrow gel. So he tells them that, you know, she is barely breathing, but she has a very slow pulse. So in the midst of all this, you know, 2 ambulances end up being called. But when the first ambulance actually arrives, the doctor on the ambulance is Dr. Gordon. And he mentions that she's bleeding from the head. He realizes that she's bleeding from the head. And from that point, they try to do everything they can, all the life-saving measures that they have. So from like the electrical shock charges on the chest, CPR, cardiac massages, they've tried it all to kind of bring her back, but none of it works. I mean, they gave her 4 adrenaline shots. 4 adrenaline shots, and nothing worked for her, unfortunately. So while Dr. Gordon is there, he does examine her head where she's bleeding, and he finds a small hole. And to him, it looks like, you know, a skull fracture, and the husband is saying, you know, maybe she bumped her head on the 2 beams that were above their toilet and bidet. And Dr. Gordon seems to think that that makes logical sense, and maybe that's what the skull fracture is from. And he then pronounces her dead, assuming that it's an accident. And of course, that's what they're telling all the family as they arrive. They're all being told that this is an accident. So after they've done that examination, they've pronounced her dead, the family is starting to arrive. So the masseuse, along with Dr. Gordon, start to clean up the scene because they want to make it presentable for the family. And that includes cleaning up the body. Now, there are so many things that are wrong with that. It's a crime, like you don't know until the police get there. It's a crime scene. It's a possible crime scene. So touching anything, moving anything, cleaning anything up, you're tampering with evidence. You're messing with a crime scene. So we learned that the masseuse and the doctor actually cleans her face or tries to wash her face and get some blood off of her face to make her more presentable. They also wipe the walls. There's blood on the walls, which we'll talk about that later. There's blood on the wall. They clean the walls. They want to make the room as presentable as possible for Maria's family when they come in. Big mistake. So while all of this is happening, a second doctor, Dr. Biasi, he comes on the scene in the second ambulance, because again, there was a second ambulance that was called during this whole process. So he arrives on the scene and he examines Maria and he finds 3 holes in her skull. And he says that the holes were so big that he can fit his finger about this far into one of the holes, which starts to make me wonder if she just, hit her head and she fell and it was an accident, she cracked her skull on a beam. Why would there be 3 puncture holes in her skull big enough to stick a finger in? He mentioned to the doctor that was already on the scene, Dr. Gordon, he mentioned, this does not look like an accident to me. If I were you, I would be calling and reporting this to the police. And he said that he also told the family that they should call the police because it does not look like an accident happened here as they said it did. It seemed to be a more violent death. And he specifically said it was a violent and dubious death. So he knew right away that this was not an accident. He also mentioned that he didn't really understand why Dr. Gordon thought it was appropriate or okay to clean up a scene where an accident or a potential crime could have happened. Ding, 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 ding. Now, when it came to, getting a death certificate, for some strange reason, it just felt like the family was in such a rush to say, yeah, this was an accident. Okay, let's get this cleaned up. Let's get her buried. Let's get a death certificate and let's really be done with this and move on. But neither one of the doctors on the scene would sign a death certificate saying that it was an accident. So when they find out that neither one of the doctors on the scene are willing to sign a death certificate saying that Maria's death was an accident, the brother-in-law, Bartoli, Guillermo, he, along with the family friend who also lived in the neighborhood, and his name was Michael Taylor, they go on a hunt to find a funeral home that will issue a death certificate late at night and get her all buried late at night, that night. So they go to the funeral home. I think this was the funeral home that was pretty much closest to them. And the doctor or the funeral director, the examiner there said he is not willing to sign a death certificate before or without actually examining and physically seeing the body, which is what you should expect. That is the professional thing to do. But they say, okay, well, we got to find somebody who's going to do it tonight. We can pay them, we can bribe them, whatever we're going to do. We need to get her buried and get this kind of done and taken care of tonight. So they drive all the way into Buenos Aires, which is the city, and they finally find somebody that is willing to take a bribe or a payment to sign a death certificate for a body that they have never seen, never examined, and the information, in fact, on said death certificate was completely fake. It said that Maria died from pretty much cardiac arrest or a heart attack, and that she died in an apartment in a completely different city from where she actually lived. Now, somebody explained to me why the family is so in a rush to deem this an accident and get her buried and death certificate signed that night. And B, Why are they forcing fake information onto the death certificate? If it was truly an accident, then the actual accident is what should be said on the death certificate. Like, somebody make it make sense. And something that we find out later during the trial is that no police ever came on the scene. No police. And we find out that is because whether it was Carlos or one of the family members, somebody spoke to the community president of Carmel and said, "We heard that the police are coming to our house. No matter what, can you please just not let them in? You can bribe them. I don't care what you do. Just do not let them in." I find that very strange, because why would you not want the police there? If something happened to your sister, something happened to your wife, why are you not wanting the police there to help to find out what the hell happened to your loved one? So the next day, we find out that her brother is now like, something that happened last night, this whole thing that happened with my sister last night, it doesn't sit well with me. It just feels fishy. And this is her brother Juan, or John in English. They refer to him as both. But we find out that he doesn't think that this is, what's happening. And although the family thinks, maybe he's just, riled up, we all think it's an accident, they still, which is what should have happened, they still consider his feelings and his thoughts. The other brothers, Horatio, decided to call in a couple of favors to his friend, who was a judge, a pretty high-powered judge. And he called his friend and said, "It doesn't feel right. We just want somebody to kind of come in and double check and make sure that this truly was an accident." So his judge friend then calls a prosecutor and calls in a favor from the prosecutor, and also calls the police commissioner. So the prosecutor and the police commissioner, they come to the Carrascosa house, and of course Maria's body is still there because that is where they held the wake for her. And they're checking out the scene. They're just checking out, asking questions, the normal things that you would expect of a crime scene. Now, the other big thing that happened during the time before the prosecutors got there was that as they are moving Maria's body to place her on the bed to prepare her for this wake that they're gonna have in her master bedroom, they find a mysterious piece of lead under her body. Now, everyone says, "Oh, the lead looks like a piece or a nodule that you would use for a shelf, like on a bookshelf." That is what they thought it was. So they just took it and they flushed it down the toilet. They took it and they picked it up. It was Horatio, the brother. He took it, he picked it up with a piece of paper or paper towel, and he took it and threw it in the toilet and flushed it down the toilet. Why? Like, why would you do that? And I mean, that was the same question that the prosecutor had. Horatio shared this information with the prosecutor and said, "Yeah, I found this random piece of lead under my sister's body, and I picked it up with a paper towel and I just put it down the toilet. I didn't think it was anything, so I just flushed it down the toilet." Not threw it in the garbage, not anything else. He flushed it down the toilet. So, of course, my question, and also the prosecutor's question, was, well, why would you pick it up if you felt like it was garbage and it was not important? Why would you pick it up with a piece of paper and not just with your hand? And his response was, "Oh, that's how I see it on the crime shows. But I thought this was an accident." Like, it's just too much, just too much. So if you research the actual case, you'll see a lot of talk about the thingy, which is what her brother called it because he said he didn't know what it was. So he just called it the thingy when he talked to the prosecutor, etc., and the police. So the thingy is the little piece of lead that he found, picked up with a paper towel to make sure he didn't get his own fingerprints or DNA on it, and flushed it down the toilet. So the prosecutor asked to have an autopsy done on the body just to make sure that it was actually an accident and not something more than that. So they have an examiner, a medical examiner, look at the body, and they find that there's not 3 holes, but 5 holes in Maria's head. And these are not accident holes. These are not even blunt force trauma holes. These are bullet holes. And they know that because they also find 5 goddamn bullets in her skull. And I remember them saying, like, as I was watching one of the documentaries about the case, I remember them saying that the medical examiner referenced her head as being empty. So the brain tissue had been, the holes were big enough so that some of the brain tissue was leaving out of her head. Like, this is just, it's baffling. It's baffling how the family could have just on that night said, oh, this looks like an accident. Makes sense. How? She has 5 holes in her head. 5. And not just 5. They can see that she was shot 6 times, but one of the bullets bounced off of her skull, did not completely penetrate her skull. So there is 6 shots fired at this woman. The medical examiner also says that they saw defensive wounds. So this was a violent assault. How did they miss all of this? And I understand, like, grief, pain, shock, but they weren't so far into shock that they didn't clean it up for the family, and the family cleaned it up even more by moving her body. They weren't in enough shock and grief that they made a clear decision to try to get her buried as soon as possible and try to get a death certificate, a fake phony death certificate signed for her death. Like, I just don't understand how these obvious signs, they even had a doctor there telling them that this looked like a violent death and not an accident, but they ignored all of the signs, all of the red flags. And it's just so shocking, and it's so unfortunate for the justice that Maria deserved, because had they not touched her body, had they not touched the crime scene and cleaned things up, the case could have been solved easier. The case could have an end to it, and we would know. Especially in the time in 2002, DNA was available. We would have known who was in that house. It's so unfortunate. All right, y'all, I'll be right back. I gotta put my lashes on. So the family flushed, specifically the brother Horatio flushed the mysterious piece of lead down the toilet, which we later find out is the actual 6th missing bullet that bounced up against her skull that didn't necessarily penetrate the skull. So what they have to do in order to find this bullet is drain the septic tank. And actually the family helped to drain it because they wanted to find it. They take the piece of lead that they found and they compare it against the bullets that they found in her skull, and we find out that the 6th piece of lead is confirmed to be the 6th bullet that was missing, scientifically confirmed. So we know that there were 6 shots fired at Maria. So something else that they find, which is very strange, the medical examiner finds that it appears that cyanogen, which is what you find in glue, specifically super glue, was found around and in 3 of the bullet holes that were in her skull. So somebody basically tried to super glue, and this is very gruesome, super glue the holes that were in her head closed to make it look like there was no hole there, to make her more presentable. And just why? Why? Her husband tried to say that the cyanogen came from lice shampoo that she was using, medicated lice shampoo. And there was a chemical expert, a chemist, and he was an expert witness for the trial later on down the line. But he basically said, if the cyanogen was from a lice shampoo, then we should have found cyanogen all over her scalp, all over her head and her hair, not just in 3 of the bullet holes. And it wasn't even in all 5 of the bullet holes. It was in 3 of the bullet holes. So the argument that it was from lice shampoo absolutely just made 0 sense. So now, because things are just starting to look so fishy, crime scene investigation team, he has them go into the home with luminol. Now, they go in and they spray everything with luminol. And lo and behold, when they turn the lights off and they turn those blue lights on, the walls light up, completely light up. There is blood spatter everywhere, all over the walls, blood spray all over the walls. There's even like a hand dragging on the wall, blood everywhere. Now, how is there blood everywhere in the room when she was supposed to have hit her head between the bathroom and the bidet in the bathroom, and then she stumbled back and fell face forward into the bathtub? So they cut samples of the drywall out where they've identified these blood sprays and spatters, and they test them for DNA. And they find that the DNA is of course, Maria Marta's blood. And then there is the DNA profiles of 3 other people. And those 3 people were 1 woman and 2 men. So they find that one of the DNA profiles that was a male's profile was a relative of Maria Marta. Now, that's what the prosecution says. The defense says that it wasn't necessarily a relative. It could have been that the blood was mixed with Maria Marta's blood, which made it look like it was a relative. But I'm pretty sure that science knows how to separate out the 2 profiles of DNA and figure out if it's a relative or not. So I don't know. I like to follow what science says, but who am I? So after this happens and they find those 3 DNA profiles outside of Maria Marta's, they ask the family, who you would expect to want to willingly give their DNA for elimination. The prosecution asked the family to provide DNA profiles. Obviously, that's the next step in an investigation. They want to rule out the husband. They want to rule out the family members. They want to rule out everyone that was on the scene once they arrived, because these people were there prior to police and the prosecutions and the crime scene technicians' arrival. So naturally, you want to try to eliminate those people and move on with the investigation. But the family absolutely refused to provide DNA samples. Meanwhile, everyone else, everyone that the family was accusing of murdering their sister, everyone else willingly, quickly gave DNA samples and were ruled out. Now, while all of this is happening, the police also found out that Carlos didn't necessarily go straight home after leaving the family's home. He actually stopped by the clubhouse of their country club, and he decided to have a limoncello and a coffee with the manager. And both the manager and the waiter that was there, they both remember him being there within that time frame of when he said he was leaving the sisters and the brother-in-law's house and when he went home. So He denies it, of course. He said he didn't go that day. If he did, he went earlier in the day before he went to the brother-in-law's house. But the two witnesses say for sure he was there between 6 and 7 p.m. Now, why he would lie about that, I don't know, because that actually would be an alibi if his wife was being killed during that time period. So I'm not quite sure why he was fighting it so fiercely that he was not there, other than the fact that it would make him a liar. I feel like that would have actually been an alibi for him to be the reason that he did not kill his wife. So while all of this is going on, the prosecution is building a case against the husband, and it didn't feel like they had a whole ton of information or evidence that it was actually the husband who murdered her, but they arrested him anyway. And they charged him with covering up a murder, and then they also charged him with her actual murder. Now, while the prosecution is busy building their case against Carlos, her husband, and the family, there's all these other rumors swirling in the neighborhood about a neighbor that no one particularly is fond of in the neighborhood, and that is a person named Nicolas Pacello. And Nicholas just seems like a bad character according to the neighbors in the country club. It almost felt like he, for some reason, didn't deserve to be there, is the way that it seemed when other people talked about him. His father was one of the founding people of the country club, which is why he ended up living there. His father, when he passed, left him some money and left him, I assume, the home in the country club that he helped to found. They always suspected that Pacello was just up to no good. There was a point where, things like laptops went missing in the neighborhood, just at random people's homes. There was a point where even their dog went missing. Somebody kidnapped Maria's and Carlos's dog. His name was Tom. And they kidnapped the dog, and then a little while later, they asked for ransom for the dog. And basically, Maria and Carlos refused to pay ransom for the dog because they said it's a dog. So, which I don't agree with. I love dogs. Save your dog. They didn't want to pay the ransom for the dog, and it doesn't sound like they ever got the dog back, but they accused Pacello for the kidnapping of the dog. They think he was the one that kidnapped the dog. Now, also, other theories arise around a mysterious woman that was dressed as a maid during the time of the crime. Neighbors say, and other witnesses, they saw this woman in a pink maid outfit, but Maria and Carlos did not hire a maid, or they didn't have any maid services for that day. So it was really, really strange that all of a sudden there's a maid on the scene and nobody knew who she was. The family was still trying to work with the prosecutor, and they had come up with a composite sketch of the woman that was in the maid costume or the maid outfit for that day. For whatever reason, the prosecutor would not take that piece of evidence and submit it into the case file. I think he just felt like the family was just grasping at straws and trying to come up with red herrings and things to kind of get him away from thinking that it was them. And so instead, the family said, well, if he's not gonna take it seriously, then we'll do it ourselves. So the brother ends up taking that information, going on a TV show, and he shows the composite sketch that they came up with of this woman that was dressed in a maid costume. Now, supposedly, the woman looked exactly like Pacello's wife, and that's, evidence that it was Pacello. Everybody thinks that it was Pacello because they don't like him. He's there. They don't want him there. They want him to move out. And now his wife is an accomplice to the crime. Now, while all of this is happening, and now Pacello's family is being attacked in the media, and he's being chased everywhere, and, it's just going crazy. His mom, unfortunately, couldn't take it and she commits suicide. Now, his mom had a lot of, trauma from previous things that happened in her life, and she had some mental health issues. So this was kind of like just the final straw for her. So she unfortunately took her own life, but she wrote a letter saying that her son was completely innocent and her death is the fault of Maria Marta's family and what they were doing to her son and her family. Now, eventually, prosecutors say that they clear Pacello when he has an alibi that confirms that he was not even in town when the murder happened. Now, there were witnesses that said that they saw Pacello jogging through the neighborhood moments before, jogging past Maria Marta while she was on her way home, moments before she was murdered. He claims that he does not jog, it was not him, but there were 4 different people who confirmed that they saw him moments before this woman was murdered. But at the end of the day, he was cleared and he was no longer considered a suspect in the murder of Maria Marta. Now, Pacello had also given his DNA to the prosecutors early on, as soon as they asked for it, to have them tested against the DNA profiles that they found at the scene. And Pacello's DNA was not any of the 3 profiles that were found at the scene. Now, supposedly there were some other kind of theories and rumors that Maria Marta was killed because she had, or her family and friends had, some link with the Juarez cartel in Mexico. Supposedly their really close friend, the Taylors, the wife's sister, supposedly had some direct ties with the cartel. And the theory was that somebody in Maria Marta's family was using one of her charity accounts to launder money without her knowing. And then at some point she found out, she confronted them and threatened to go to the authorities. And that's the reason why she got killed. But none of that was ever validated. There was no evidence. There was no information on any of that to make that argument valid at any point during this case. So the prosecutors, they arrested her husband for the murder. They say he was there when she was murdered. He knows what happened. He's a co-author or an accomplice. He helped to cover up the murder afterwards. So all of this is happening, and the prosecutor still also believes that the family was involved as well. They just didn't have enough evidence on all of them. It didn't really seem like they had enough evidence on any of them in the first place, but they felt like they had the strongest case against Carlos. So the family decided, well, it's better for him to go to trial and he'll get, acquitted, and then that'll be better for all of us. That'll just say that we had nothing to do with it either. So they pretty much treated Carlos like a sacrificial lamb and having him go to trial without, any of them being charged whatsoever. So y'all, this case lasted for almost 4 months. Almost 4 months for a case. And they spent the first 2 months of trial just reading the case file. Literally 2 months of somebody just reading the case file out loud. They could have gave them the Sparks notes. Like, what? Where's Cliff Notes when you need them? What? They spent the rest of the time hearing witnesses and what witnesses had to say. And they have Dr. Biasi testify, and he said that he told Dr. Gordon that he should report this. This does not look like an accident, and he should report it, and that he saw Dr. Gordon wash the victim's face and cleaned up the scene. Just crazy. He said her face was originally covered with blood and the doctor washed it. Now, the chief of police also testified that Horatio, the brother, called. And when he called, he said, I hear that the police are on the way to my sister's house. My sister has had an accident. Can you please not have the police come to our house? Can you please just do whatever you can to get the police off our backs? Why? Like, I get that they're an affluential family. I get that they have a high place in society, so maybe they don't want to draw a bunch of attention to their family with what happened, but you want the police there to help find out what the hell happened to your sister. Because had you had the police there in the first place, we might know by now what happened to your sister, who murdered your sister. It could have just been a different story. It could have been a different ending. So the police chief says after he got that call from Horatio saying, get the police off my back, he called the local police chief and said, this idiot just called me asking to get the police off your back. Let the prosecutor know. And the police chief said he let the prosecutor know. So that's how the prosecutor found out that there was a call placed to police saying, can you do whatever you can, calling in a favor to get the police off the family's back while all of this was taking place that night. So during the trial, finally the family decides, okay, we will give our DNA. So they all give their DNA, and come to find out, none of their DNA matches the DNA that was found at the scene. We learned from her friend Inez that the day after this all happened, Inez went to visit the Taylors. So she went and stopped by for tea with Peachy, which was the wife, and then Michael Taylor, which was the person who went to try to search out a funeral home to sign a death certificate. So she said she sat down with her and she said, this just doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like it was an accident. What the hell happened? She claims that Peachy told her, we just did what Carlos asked us to do, which was go to find a place that would bury his wife quickly and sign a fake death certificate. So none of the people in her family were actually allowed to testify at the trial for Carlos because they were all suspected as accomplices in the murder as well. So they could not testify on behalf of Carlos. Inez also said that Carlos told them, being the Taylors, to do whatever you can to avoid an autopsy. Now, why we would want to avoid an autopsy for your loving wife and family member, I have no clue. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Now, also in the trial, we have the maid of Maria Marta's sister, Irene, testifying that she remembers clearing the table at 6 p.m. because the radio chimed and it told her that it was 6 p.m. That was the indication that the hour had hit and it was 6 p.m. And she specifically remembers clearing the table and no one was there. So that means that if no one was there, Carlos was not at the brother-in-law's house until 6:50, like he said he was, and then went home within that 10 minutes around 7 o'clock. So according to the maid, he wasn't there at even 6 o'clock. So where was he? So we have somebody saying that Carlos was not at the family's house, that is not a family member, that has no reason to try to cover up for the family or the husband. So the maid is saying, no, nobody was there at 6 o'clock. I cleared the table, nobody was there. And I knew exactly what time it was because of A, B, C. And then we have two people, a manager and a waiter from the clubhouse, saying he stopped around 6, somewhere between 6 and 7. He stopped in and had a coffee and a limoncello. So was he waiting there to give his wife time to get home? What was going on? Because the story is just not making sense. It just does not make sense to me. Now, we also find out that the masseuse was not actually there when Carlos said that she was. According to the masseuse and the people at the gate, she was actually not there when Carlos entered the house or right after he entered the house. She was actually stuck at the gate for about 20 minutes before she was able to be let in and go to the house. So what was going on in that 20-minute window where the masseuse was not there, Carlos was there? What was happening? So during the trial, we also find out that they were able to enhance the 911 phone calls and were able to actually hear what the people in the background were saying while Carlos was on the phone with emergency services. So with that information, we were able to find out that pretty much they knew she was dead when they called already, because you can hear people in the background saying she's dead. You can hear people saying, close the door, they're coming, close the door. So this is why, again, I go back to, what is the truth? What is the truth? And then, of course, on the other side, you hear, people doubting it and people saying, well, words are just kind of being made up. They can't hear for sure what's being said, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just this case. But the prosecution claims that they heard 3 voices in the call. They heard Guillermo Bartoli, who is Irene's husband, her sister, and they hear her sister Irene, and they say that they hear Carlos. So that just puts a whole different spin on it. If the masseuse was not there when the phone call was being made, like Carlos said that she was the one there giving CPR, if the masseuse was not there and it was Irene's voice, because there is a woman's voice in the background, and it was Irene's voice and her husband was there, although Irene said she ran to go get help in a neighbor's house, it's just so many unanswered questions. There's no clear story here. Eventually, the husband is found guilty for covering up the murder. However, he's not found guilty initially of the actual murder, which I don't really know how much sense that makes either, because as far as I understand with the law, if you are present for a murder, you are guilty of murder, just as guilty as the person who actually pulled the trigger. However, he was acquitted on the actual charge of murder. Now, the prosecutor appealed the acquittal of murder. Now, when the prosecutor appealed the acquittal of murder, he actually won that, and that was overturned. And Carlos was actually convicted of the murder. Carlos was actually convicted of the murder and sentenced to life in prison. Now, there was a second trial that happened, and this one was specifically for the family members. And this took place in 2011. They were all charged in the cover-up of the murder. So as a result of this trial, Dr. Gordon, Horatio, John, Guillermo, their friend Benello, they were all convicted of covering up a murder, and they were sentenced to 4 years. Irene was not convicted. The masseuse was not convicted. However, in 2015, Dr. Gordon had his conviction overturned. And then in 2020, so February of this year, Horatio, John, and Benello, all of their convictions were overturned. And unfortunately, in 2014, Irene's husband, Guillermo Bartoli, actually passed away before he was able to get his conviction overturned. Now, apparently, Carlos was let out of prison in 2014 when he turned 70, because in Argentina, when you either turn 70 or you are diagnosed with a chronic disease, chronic illness, they allow you to be out of prison and on house arrest instead. So he was let out at the age of 70 in 2014. So he later won a review of his case with the Supreme Court, and this happened in 2016. And the medical examiner had actually found a few years back in 2011 that Maria had broken ribs that were post-mortem. So that would have put her time of death at about 6:30 at the latest. So that would have put her death into a window where Carlos was definitely not at home. So that would have been no later than 6:30. So that ultimately is what got his conviction overturned. Now, we circle back to Pacello. So Pacello ends up being not so good of a guy. He is arrested with drug possession. He's a gambler and he doesn't do very well at it, loses a lot of money fast. And he's actually caught on camera burglarizing someone's home. And it was a similar situation to where he was burglarizing the home in one of these private communities, country clubs, and you can clearly see his face on security camera. It's him. There is no doubt about it. It is him, which leads the prosecution to kind of reopen the case and look at it as maybe Pacello is our main suspect. He's done these burglaries in similar situations in similar communities, so it could very well be that he was the one who actually burglarized Maria Marta's home while she was there, and it was a robbery gone bad. And they also made the assumption that the two security guards that were in the area that Carlos said he saw was in his driveway getting ready to leave, and Carlos asked him what was going on, why he was there. It could have very well been that the security guard was actually there because of the burglary that was going on or whatever they were doing inside. We also find out that Pacello knows the masseuse. So all of these things start to fit and tie together, and then we think back and the mysterious woman that had on a maid outfit looked just like his wife. So all of these things kind of tie together. So there's all these questions circulating around the case still to this day, but we did find out, and I've looked and looked for a specific date, but I cannot find a date, but Pacello is set to go to trial sometime next year along with two of the security guards that were deemed suspects in this case. So hopefully we will get some type of closure. Like I said, it makes a whole lot more sense that Pacello was actually involved with all these other pieces and him doing similar crimes. He's in jail currently for the two burglaries that he committed, and he's awaiting trial for the murder of Maria Marta. Okay, you guys, so that is the story of Maria Marta Garcia Belsunce. And I really wish that it was a solved murder. I am so, I love to hear a story that has a great ending where the person who actually did it is caught behind bars and the family can have closure. But this particular story has been getting some more press in recent days because, again, there will be a trial soon for the neighbor and two of the security guards of the community, and Netflix just did a documentary about it, and I do advise you guys to go and check out that documentary. This is not sponsored in any way, but if you go check out that documentary, it gives a lot of great insight and information on the murder, and it is in Spanish, so there are subtitles, but if you can make it through that, trust me, you will love it. You'll love it. So other than that, guys, this is the final look. I went a little bit bold today with the lip. I wanted to do a no liner matte lip, and I think this color worked really well for me. Let me know what you guys think. I think the look overall is pretty good. I did a little bit of a half cut crease, 3/4 cut crease, but I just wanted to go with something a little bit different today, and I think I like it. What do you think? Let me know in the comments down below what you think of the look, what you thought of the story today. Is there something that I missed in my research that you guys know about? I want to hear about your thoughts of this story because it was super interesting to me. It was a look into what the elite life is like and the lengths that they will go to keep their reputation intact. It's just crazy. Like their reputation and all of the actions that the family took, it just feels like their reputation, their family reputation and standing was just more important than finding their sister's murderer. And they may not have been involved in the murder at all whatsoever, but those actions that they took that night when the crime actually happened really almost ruined being able to solve for her murder. But other than that, those are my final thoughts. I promise this time. Other than that, I love you guys as always. Bye.